The change will allow for local resources that have historical significance in the community to be designated as landmarks. Participating today are Carl Spector, the Environment Commissioner, Roseanne Foley, Executive Director of the Landmarks Commission, Lynn Smilage, or I apologize, Smillage, thumbs up if I got
Smilage.
Chair of the Landmarks,
Thanks.
Craig Gaylor, I'm hoping I got that right, from the Executive Director of Boston Preservation Alliance, and Allison Frazee, possibly, Assistant Director of the Boston Preservation Alliance. The committee has also received numerous emails supporting the home rule petition, and I wanted to acknowledge that for those who will not be participating today, we did receive your emails, we did receive your phone calls. Thank you very much for letting us know your opinion. And again, as stated, it has been overwhelmingly positive and supportive. I'm going to turn it over to the lead sponsors, Councillor Bach, and then Councillor Bader when she comes in. But for now, just want to list who's in order of arrival, who is also participating with us here. Along with Councillor Bach and Councillor Baden, there's Councillor Flynn and Councillor Baker. I believe as other councillors come in, I will announce them, and then we'll go through I guess, the order of questions and whatnot. We'll very likely have all of our guest speakers speak at once after we do introductory remarks. Therefore, we can kind of get the entire, I guess, conversation going. And then we'll have councillors go through with any questions they may have for the lead sponsors or for any of our guests today. And then we're going to go to public testimony and make sure that we can get as many people testifying as possible. We do have people signed up. So ideally, we're going to try our best to make sure they get to speak as soon as possible. So I'll turn it over to Councillor Bach, and then if Councillor Braden comes in, we'll turn it to her, and then we'll go to Councillor Flynn and Councillor Baker.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And thank you to all the panelists and fellow councillors, members of the public for being here today. So this proposed home rule petition emerged from a lot of conversations that I've had over the past year and before with preservation advocates, broadly construed, meaning people, across our neighborhoods who are looking to preserve some of Boston's history. And in talking to people about the tools that we have and the ways in which they work and don't work, one of the things that came up was that when we passed the legislation at the state level to create the Boston Landmarks Commission back in 1975, it was actually like quite a cutting edge thing and really set a precedent that other cities around the country followed. But since then, in certain respects, we've been lapped. And one of them is that our definition of the landmark in the Landmarks Commission enabling legislation says that a landmark has to be of significance to the city and Commonwealth, which basically means it has to be of significance to the Commonwealth or the nation. And really, since that legislation was written, there are lots of places that have experimented and I think done so really successfully with making local landmarks also possible, places that are of significance to the city. And in Boston, we're now less than a decade out from our 400th anniversary of Boston's founding in 2030. And I think that this really should be a decade where we think about how to preserve our city's history. And I also think that, and this is something that I think about a lot as a historian before I was a counselor, is just about the importance of our regulations and our kind of government attitudes about historic preservation catching up to the historical field. And one of the things the historical field's gotten a lot better at since 1975 is acknowledging the richness and diversity of history. The whole field of immigrant history has really flourished. The focus on African American stories, Native American histories. It's just like both who's being focused on and the tools that are being used to tell that wider array of stories has really, really evolved in, I think, really important ways for recognizing all types of Bostonians. And I think that the standard of significance to the Commonwealth or nation has tended to be interpreted in ways that have privileged buildings of significance to a certain kind of white narrative about the history of Boston. And I think that that's something that we should find ways to undo. And I think that every community in the city has places of a lot of importance to the community and the city. And as we try to tell that story of Boston more fully in the coming decade, I think that this change can be a piece of that. So, you know, it's not something that's going to automatically landmark. I think that's one thing we should just get out, you know, on the table here. There's the whole legislation still sets up a process for people to go through to pursue a landmark. It doesn't kind of just take every old building and make it landmarked or something. I know there's some concern about that. It's more just a question of, you know, if you've got a building that's of real importance to the city, can you go through this process to get it landmarked? And right now you're getting cut off at the pass. So I think I would love for this to be something that we could move through the Boston City Council and send up to the State House. As Councilor Edwards said, it would need consideration there and the signature of the governor. But I really appreciate the many, many people who have written and reached out, and frankly, the community advocates from whom this idea came originally. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Councillor Bach for allowing me to co-sponsor this this hearing order, this home rule. What is it? I feel strongly about this this issue. I've been one of the first organizations I joined when I came to this neighborhood was the Historical Society, because it was a way to understand the neighborhood and the history of the neighborhood and the people who have lived here over hundreds of years. And I feel that this initiative is an important important thing to try and protect some of our buildings and places even in our neighborhoods that are very significant to the history of the local population and the communities who've lived here, not only now, but in the past. And I think it's very worthy of pursuing, and I hope that we can successfully navigate it through and up to the city, up to the State House for approval. Thank you.
Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Councilor Braden and Councilor Bach. I too want to echo what both Councilor Braden and Councilor Bach emphasized about, you know, the proud immigrant roots of our city, in making sure that we recognize certain neighborhoods and certain areas and certain contributions, especially in the immigrant community, whether it's the recently arriving immigrants from various countries or if it was the Irish coming over 110 years ago. But I'm really interested in learning more about the contributions of the immigrants to our city and making sure that that history is kept. I think that's very important. And as part of this working group, I would like to learn more about the proposal and see what specifically the city of Boston has to do to determine something historic, or what type of interaction they have to do with the state or federal government, or how they identify something as a historic building. And also, you know, I know it has to go up to the State House. It has to be approved by the legislature, signed by the governor. But I'm just also wondering if there are proposals that are already in the pipeline that may or may not be, you know, part of the historic designation. Would those kind of be grandfathered in and basically given a waiver, I should say, or what that process would be? So I just want to learn more about this proposal. And I want to say thank you to Councilor Bach, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Edwards as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the two lead sponsors on this important issue here. So for my clarification, again, I'm here to listen and learn to see what it is that we're trying to do. So we're looking to have the city of Boston be able to stand alone when they make a landmark decision. And that's what the section 2, the change in section 2 is going to do. I know it's a statement, but Kenzie, can you answer that?
Madam Chair.
Do you mind if I just do my quick statement, and then we're gonna go
Sure.
allow everybody, and just real quick, that's all.
Yeah.
I don't think any other counselors have joined.
Council Flaherty's on.
Counselor Flaherty, if you would please go forward, and then I'll go, and then we'll go right to other folks. Thank you, Counselor
Very
Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and for hosting the hearing, and also for Councilors Bach and Braden for their leadership on this issue. And I've often stated that Boston is a city with enormous historical significance, and I agree with the sponsors that we have an obligation to preserve that history through landmarks, education, and storytelling. There have been there's been a lot of development across the city, and many of our neighborhoods look differently now than they did just 5 years ago. And oftentimes we hear from constituents who want to landmark a specific site that has historical significance around the same time that it's undergoing Article 85 demolition delay review and going to be significantly altered or demolished. So it's certainly important that as a city, we are able to exercise local authority over landmarks to preserve our rich local history. And it's also important that the process of our Landmarks Commission has in place, allows for them to do a thorough vetting, and it's not used as a tool to slow down renovations or developments or bring developments to a grinding halt. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about this petition and how the petition will enable us to do just that, and to generally learn more about the landmarks process. So thank you again to the sponsors, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just very briefly, I also thank the sponsors and my colleagues for being here today. I see this as really not an anti-development or even slowing down process, as so much as a pro-neighborhood and pro-city pride home rule petition. It's about how we can amplify how every single one of us, no matter where we're from, what ship we came on, can connect to some aspect of Boston, and that we were all here at some point. I'm beyond excited about it, because I think it really helps all of us to see ourselves more in the city and to preserve how our ancestors contributed to making this the best city in the country. I also wanted to just note that there's been some things that have been lost that we'll never get back, because I think people were confused about the process, or it happened too late. East Boston is the #2 port for immigrants in the country, only behind Ellis Island, and the Immigration Processing Center was torn down, and we have condos where that is, and that's painful to know that we didn't know to value that until it was already gone. Yes, there are controversies around certain aspects and whether they'll stop development or not. And I don't want this conversation to delve into that. That is not about today. That's not what today is about. It's really clarifying the process and how we, as I think, and I want to thank Councilor Braden and Councilor Bach, how not normal people, but how everyday people can be part of preserving their history and being prideful of their neighborhoods and the history that it comes from. And I think the current process is set up has taken that out of the hands of everyday people who don't really know about it until it's almost too late. So I really look forward to that. I'll turn it over to Councilor Bach to answer, just nuts and bolts how this would work in terms of and what change it's making. And then we'll go to the guest speakers, and then we'll go through a round of questions. Councilor Bach?
Sure. Just very briefly to answer Councilor Baker's question. So right now, it's our own Boston Landmarks Commission that gets to make these decisions. And I also, with Lynn on the panel, I'm sure she can speak more to this. It's just that right now, the legal standard that they have to make the decision on is that the landmark has to be of significance to the state or the nation. They can't, if it was demonstrated its significance at the city level, like that doesn't clear the legal standard. Now, just across the river in Cambridge, to get something locally landmarked, it has to be of significance to the city of Cambridge. So this isn't like a crazy thing that no one does. It's just that when we wrote our statute back in the 70s, we made it that state or nation standard. And so it's really about giving the flexibility for that that city history to be highlighted in this process as well.
Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question, Councillor Baker?
Yes, I think so. So would be able to designate as a standalone. We wouldn't need it. We would like, so if significant for the city of Boston or even Dorchester for that matter, that would be the one, that would be the hurdle we would need to overcome.
Right, exactly. So it makes that,
Thank you.
that less hurdle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go to our panel speakers. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce each one, and then we'll just have you all speak a little bit. I'm assuming most of you are speaking in support of this this proposal. If you are not, that's also fine. You're welcome to give your take on this, as well as any suggestions for language or things in other ways in which this process can be either improved or in which the home rule petition, excuse me, can be changed. So we'll go ahead. I know that just noted, Dan Murphy is here from the Beacon Hill Times, but I don't believe he's testifying. He's just watching, but he did sign up. So unless he is planning on testifying, I don't think so. Just here to okay. Then we also have, excuse me, Carl Spector from the Environment Commissioner. Carl
Yes.
here? Yes. Okay, Carl, if you want to go ahead.
Okay. Councilor, thank you very much. I'm also here with Roseanne Foley from the Environment Department, who is Executive Director of the Landmarks Commission and our Director of Historic Preservation. So yes, we are here to speak in favor of the proposal that Councilor Bach and Councilor Braden have submitted. I want to, absolutely support the ideas that they've already presented. From our point of view, it has, in addition to the thematic ideas that they mentioned, Councilor Edwards, you have mentioned also, there are three great advantages to this change, small as it is. First of all, I certainly hope it will provide more clarity because it has also often been confusing about exactly what the standard is that we use for landmarks. And if in the process of passing this proposal, we also can do some more education of the community, of the neighborhoods, and of developers about the standards that we use, that is all to the good. Also, this change would bring us, would give us more consistency. Already in the city of Boston, we do some historic preservation based on local significance, but that is at the district level. We have architectural conservation districts that we can create on the basis of local significance without reaching the level of state significance. And we don't see any reason why that level of eligibility shouldn't apply to individual landmarks also, so that we will have a consistent standard that we use for all the historic preservation that we do. The third reason is efficiency. Because of the existing differences in eligibility that we have made some attempts to protect individual buildings by, instead of landmarking them, creating very, very small historic districts for which we can use the standard of local significance. Except the problem is that's a much more cumbersome and a more complicated and a lengthier process. And we would prefer not to have to go through that if we don't have to. So we think this is a very good proposal, and we certainly support its passage. Councilor Edwards, my suggestion, if you like, since Councilor Flynn asked some questions about how we actually go about the process of finding a building to be historically significant, perhaps Roseanne Foley could speak next and give a very quick overview of how we go through that process and add any additional comments she would like to make about this specific proposal.
She is up next to speak anyway, so that's great. Again, Roseanne Foley from the Executive Director of the Landmarks Commission.
Thank you, Counselor, and glad to be here. This is an oversight, I think, of some type back in the 70s that has caused us endless headaches. It will be wonderful to have locally significant landmarks. And as Carl mentioned, right now we are doing single property architectural conservation districts, but they have all the, they go through the same rigmarole as, you know, a large district. So it'll be really helpful. The way that landmarking happens is that a petition by 10 voters, registered voters, comes through for whichever resource it is that folks want to designate, and then it goes before the commission. They either accept or don't accept the petition. Then there is it goes on a waiting list. It's called a pending landmark until we get the resources to do the study report. That's also written out in the state legislation and our enabling legislation. A study report goes into all the background, the history, planning, background, architectural history, etc., so that we can then have a report that goes back to the commission to make a recommendation whether or not a designation should take place. The public is involved in the study report process. It is posted, it is made available for input, and the voting, once it takes place, hopefully in the affirmative, would go to the mayor and then the city council, and then finally is registered at the registry of deeds. So it's not a matter of waving any kind of magic wand and having something happen immediately. It is definitely a public process, and you know, we pride ourselves on being transparent as possible, and this will really go a long way in helping to address some of the inequities of what's historic where, because we know there's plenty of history in all the neighborhoods in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Milledge, Chair of the Landmarks Commission.
Thank you so much, Councilors Bach and Braden, for bringing forward this really important issue. I've been privileged to sit on the Landmarks Commission for 12 years, 11 of those as chair, and also on the 4 Point Channel, Local Historic District Commission, and the Study Committee for the prospective Highland Park Conservation District in Roxbury. So the Boston Landmarks Commission has only three preservation tools that we can use to protect our built heritage. And of those three, two of them really don't work too well. We really need good tools now, especially today in light of the record-breaking number of buildings that are being demolished across the city. Many of these buildings are lost to the great dismay of their neighborhoods. The numbers are particularly high in Roxbury, East Boston, and Dorchester. So I'll just briefly mention the three tools. I know we're talking about landmarking today. The first one, Carl mentioned the local historic districts like the South End District, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, 4 Point Channel. They work very nicely in protecting the buildings in those districts. However, they take years to put in place. It's a very lengthy, complicated process. Article 85, demolition delay, is our second tool, with which most of you, I think, are probably familiar. And I think there's pretty general agreement that it doesn't work at all, largely a waste of time and effort. The third tool is landmarking. And landmarking is tricky because we can only landmark a handful of buildings. In fact, right now, there are about 110 buildings landmarked in Boston. The vast majority of buildings in Boston aren't eligible today to be a Boston landmark. And that's what this will fix. That pesky word and the lack of a comma in the legislation forces us to only consider buildings eligible for landmarking that are important beyond Boston. And we believe that a building needs to be important to Bostonians to be a Boston landmark, not to the state or the region or the nation. So this ambiguous language has been a problem for a while, since 1975, in fact. These handcuffs have made it nearly impossible to achieve equity across the city, which has already been noted. A diversity of worthy buildings that are meaningful to their neighborhoods just can't meet the bar of significant beyond Boston. So I urge City Council to adopt this, what I believe is a long overdue change. I think it will benefit everyone in the city. We're a city of diverse neighborhoods, and each neighborhood is defined by its respective history. So thank you.
Thank you. Then we have up next, Greg Gaylor, Executive Director, Boston Preservation Alliance.
Good afternoon, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the Alliance, even though you mentioned Allison Frazee on our staff. She's not going to be speaking this afternoon. We are an advocacy organization representing 40 other nonprofits, over 100 businesses and residents throughout the city. And there's a great concern that Boston is losing its uniqueness and that neighborhoods are being homogenized, that we're losing the places residents consider important to their self-definition. And I thank you, councilors, in particular, Bach and Braden, for sponsoring, and Chair Edwards for taking action on this item. We're very much in support. We've long flagged as problematic the way that we protect our historic resources that play such a critical role, not only in the economy of the city, but in the social health of Boston residents. Every Boston resident should be able to see themselves in our city's past as it's reflected in our physical landscape. Everyone has the right to be empowered by knowing that people like them have played a significant role throughout Boston's history. This shouldn't just be a privilege of a select few. It's an equity and an honesty issue about our history that needs correction, as others have mentioned. This change is an important step. And as you've already heard from others, the legislation that allows the designation of Boston landmarks really makes no sense. Places that are significant to Boston should be able to become Boston landmarks. That would be logical. I'm in regular dialogue with peers across the nation working in historic preservation. And when I've mentioned in the past this odd Boston restriction on landmarking protection, I'm also often asked if I'm kidding. Like, really? Are you serious? Because this isn't how most cities operate. Just this morning, I emailed colleagues across the country to get confirmation that local significance is sufficient for them. So far, I've confirmed this case in a number of cities, and I'll list them: Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Milwaukee, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, Providence, Baltimore, Denver, Chicago, Cleveland, New Orleans, Philadelphia, and New York City. And the list will grow as I get more responses. This is not a radical idea. It's common. Around Massachusetts, for historic districts or single building protection, most communities use the state legislation. They don't have home rule petitions like Boston does. And in that case, there is no requirement for state or national significance. Our current system is simply not equitable, as places associated with Black, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ histories sadly don't have as well-documented national frameworks. And much of that history was kind of by the nature of their historical plight, intentionally kept below a prominent national story. And as an important reminder, just because something is landmarked doesn't mean places are frozen in time, never to be changed. The preservation community supports the evolution of the city. We just ask that it be well considered and that changes to properties considered by Bostonians to be particularly important receive extra scrutiny and review. Now, I know I shouldn't spend any more time. I just wanted to give a couple of specific examples where this change would have been beneficial. The Westgate building at 541 Commonwealth Avenue in Kenmore Square was considered sort of a gateway historic building into the city. We lost that last year, but maybe it could have been saved, but its significance was only local. The Ablana Brewery on Heath Street, which you can see behind me in Mission Hill, its derelict and an opportunity for redevelopment and preservation is being missed, and it would definitely benefit from landmark protection. Residents are desperate to save their history, and I urge you to make that change to put Boston's process on par with the rest of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So we're going to go, actually, because the fact that we have some people signed up for public testimony, and we're at 4:36. They've been waiting. If it's okay with the lead sponsor, I'm going to go. It's not that many people. They've signed up to go ahead and let the public speak a little bit, trying to put them a little bit towards the front, and then we can go through around with the counselors. Okay. So up first we have Laurie Thomas. We also have Holly Grooves and Stan Everett. I'm just going to give central staff a little bit of time to pull them out of the waiting room and into the Zoom. So it's Lauren Thomas or Lori Thomas, Holly Grooves, and Stan Everett. You want to raise your hands if you're here so we can go ahead and it's easier to find you on the Zoom.
Ollie and Lori.
I have a Holly Berry. Is that the same as Holly Grooves?
Don't know.
We'll see. So we'll go ahead and start. I don't know if Lauren Thomas is here.
Hi, I'm here,
Am I
but I was not planning to speak.
Oh, my apologies. I had you signed up for public testimony. All right then, Holly.
Yes, I want to thank the counselors for this very thoughtful, long overdue, time urgent proposal. And I think there's clearly overwhelming support, and I don't want to repeat too much the wonderful and eloquent, valid points people are bringing up. But as you know, a community volunteer, I volunteer with Fenway CDC. Race and equity has been at the first and foremost for this past year, and it's caused and had a lot of pause for people to stop and think. What I would say about this, as a layperson, not a counselor, nobody on the committees, I would say two things about it. And one is that when we're considering, and this might have more to do with the language, but when we're thinking about a piece of property as landmark, I like the idea of some true equity and inclusiveness of people of color and many different cultures. And I would say that I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the whole process should be available in multi-language. And I think it wouldn't even hurt to have some sort of campaign on this in the general public in the areas of Roxbury and Dorchester, because there's people like myself that didn't even know. I mean, I knew there was some sort of a landmark committee, but I didn't know they selected 10 people from the public and to decide on that. And I think that more people need to know more about it, basically, and it needs to be all inclusive. And as a community member, I'm so pleased to see this proposal, and I really do hope that everything is transparent. It's done in a way that is truly inclusive, thinking outside the box in terms of getting people involved that want to see their cities be a mirror of them. So inclusive true equity means notifying and including everybody in those communities. And I hope that the paperwork and the process of going through and trying to get one site for a landmark is not so difficult that it excludes people. And that's people of different cultures, language, and colors. And I thank you. And I'm in full support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to I think I looked for Stan Everett. I did not see him. He may be the phone number. I've also looked for a Daniel Coolwich. I did not see him. Or is Daniel here? No, I didn't see him. I also was looking for, I think up next is a Gilberti Furstenberg. All right, and I do know I just promoted in.
I do see him in the
You do. Okay.
attendees list.
Okay. Yeah. Gilberti Furstenberg for public testimony.
I didn't ask to speak. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
didn't plan it. I was just
you down.
listening. Thank you.
Andrew Silver. I know we promoted him. Andrew Silver for public testimony.
No, I totally support what everybody said. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Douglas Kelleher.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. My name is Douglas Kelleher. I'm a principal at Epsilon Associates, and I work with the Landmarks Commission staff and the folks at the Boston Preservation Alliance on a fairly regular basis. So we're very familiar with the Article 85 process, the local district review process, as well as the current landmarking process. Just curious to know if there's been given any thought to how the transitioning of the new policy would take place, or if that would be part of a future discussion.
I can turn that over to Councillor Bach if she wanted to answer that very briefly. With the amendment, would there be any change in the policy or the process, excuse me?
So the amendment itself obviously doesn't change anything about the process. It just changes the standard. I think that Councillor Flynn had also raised the question of like, what would there be a transition period in the Landmark Commission's implementation of this? And I would imagine, that's something I think that we should discuss. The law on its face is just going to say, oh, now the standard's different. I think probably usually it would be typical for a body like Landmarks to kind of not go back retroactively on things that were already in. But I think Councillor Edwards, it is a question for us to discuss. And I know, like I said, Councillor Flynn brought it up too. I think it's more of a administrative question, like a question about sort of the administration of the change than about amending the language, because the idea here is just to slightly change that definition of the statute by replacing that "and" with a comma.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. And then I think ultimately I had one more, George Lewis, and then we're going to go to the councilors. George Lewis. George Lewis, I see you on so, well, we're going to stop right now. And I just kind of cleared out the list of folks who got in contact with us before. We will come back to public testimony, and we're going to go to counselor, kind of a round of counselor questions, and then we'll pick up a public testimony shortly thereafter. So first we'll just, I don't know, Counselor Bach, if you had any questions or thoughts, or go ahead, please sponsor.
No, just, I appreciated, I think my questions were really along the lines of what I think Commissioner Spector and Roseanne and Lynn have already spoken to, which is the question of whether this actually, as it currently stands, creates a problem for the Landmarks Commission. Because obviously, we don't need to go in search of problems to fix if they're not there. But I think for me, knowing that we're even doing single building conservation districts sort of underscores the point that, which is not actually something I knew before your testimony. It underscores the point of why this makes sense, because at the point at which you're doing a single building conservation district, you're using one tool because the other isn't suiting the purpose. So that really answered that question for me. And I think otherwise, Madam Chair, I'll yield to others, and I'm happy to also take questions from others if they have them for the author.
Thank you. Counselor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I have one question and one comment. I'll start with my question first. I'm wondering if this passes, does the Landmark Commission, as we go into the budget season now with the City Council, with the mayor, but if this passes, do you need any additional funding in your budget to make these changes? And if so, what do you think you would need to hire another person, or are you able to do it without additional funding?
If I may, so thank you, Councillor Flynn. So it's hard to tell, that Roseanne is in particular is often in conversation with members of the community who are looking into the possibility of landmarking. So it's hard to tell how many new applications this will bring out. As we already indicated, we've already been started using some workarounds to landmark buildings that don't meet the current standard through making them very small districts. It might be that if this went through a year from now, we might be coming back and said, yes, there's been a huge outpouring and we need more capacity at this point. It's hard to tell.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I think it's an important discussion for us to have, especially at the budget, at budget time. We want to make sure that you have the right resources and tools to do your job. So that was the reason I was asking, but thank you, Carl. And my final question.
Before you go on, Councillor Flynn, Greg wanted to also answer.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, councilors. As someone outside the city who maybe is a little bit more liberated to speak openly, I spoke at budget hearings last year that, our opinion is very clear that the Landmarks Commission is already woefully inadequately funded and staffed to do their existing work. I don't think this inherently makes that more of a problem, as Carl noted, in some weird tweaks because of the workarounds this make things more efficient. But we will certainly be advocating as budget season ramps up for more resources for the Landmarks Commission, because I think that's just a problem anyway. I don't think this causes that problem.
Thank you.
Well,
back to you, Councillor Flynn.
Okay, no, thank you, Greg. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we probably have to advocate as a city council for additional funding. I don't want to see something implemented where we don't provide the necessary resources, where city employees can't do their job effectively, or we're just piling on more work for our dedicated city employees. We need to make sure that they have the funding to do their job. So that's an important aspect of it. So thank you. And then my final point is to Holly. Appreciate your comments, Holly. And I agree with you on the making sure that when this takes place, or the changes that do take place, that we're able to communicate with residents in languages other than English, whether it's Cantonese or Mandarin or Spanish. I have a large Cantonese speaking community that I represent. And it's critical that language access is part of that discussion, engagement. And I'm glad you highlighted that, Holly, because that's an important part of it. And I think as we go into the budget season, we have to look at language and communication access, which is part of the part of the city of Boston department. We need to make sure that they're fully funded as well, to make sure that our immigrant neighbors also are able to engage in all kinds of basic city services. So thank you, Holly, for bringing that up.
Can I just add one comment? Very quickly. I will not take.
Holly, I'm really going to try and move through the councillor questions. We'll come back to public testimony. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yep.
So Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple questions. And if we're not able, it's probably for you, Carl, or for you, Roseanne. And if we're not able to answer them through the chair, if you can send them to my email, that would be sufficient. I'd like to know how many parcels or buildings that we have in the process right now throughout the whole city. That would be one, in the process right now. Two, I'd like to know, are there any buildings right now that are being advocated for that would need this type of change? That would be two. I don't know if you can answer any of those now, or should you want to just send email communication?
Councillor Baker, just to confirm your question, you're curious how many buildings are in Article 85 process right now?
Well, are looking to be landmarked. Are there any buildings right now that are looking to be landmarked in the city? That's question one. And two would be, are there any buildings or parcels that right now are kind of holding back where people are talking about it that are waiting on a designation like this change here? Am I clear? Was I clear there, Madam Chair?
Yes, yes. I just want to make sure in case we had to do a follow-up via email, which it might be more, looks like we might have to do that. And we can get you the numbers of both.
Okay. Is that okay, Roseanne? Do you want to do that on email or?
Sure, I can do that, Counselor. I just want to let you know we do have a couple of single property architectural conservation districts that are pending.
Yeah.
And another one that is coming through. But we definitely have, we can get you the numbers on pending landmarks and, where they are in the process.
And also, Roseanne, if there's anything that's being talked about now that would need this change to be able to move forward, if are there any sort of applications like that?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can get that for you.
Okay,
for
and
sure.
then I have a question for Greg. You had mentioned the two buildings, the one, the Gateway, and then the Heath Street Brewery that's behind you. What are the significance of those? And I mean, the building behind you, we should be able to find a developer that will repurpose that and keep that building the way it is. It's a beautiful looking building. So can you talk about those two buildings in particular and what was the significance within those buildings that they should be designated?
Sure. I mean, this building was one of a series of breweries in the neighborhood. There was some innovative technological developments, marketing developments. It was developed by a German immigrant that has a really interesting story, and it was really important in the development of the neighborhood. So that's really the landmark history here. And you're right that this would be a great building to be developed, and we have a recalcitrant owner who's sitting on it and is kind of doing demolition by neglect. That would be harder to do if it were a landmark. The building in Kenmore Square was an important sort of residence hotel, and I think there were some really interesting local characters important to the development of the neighborhood. It also was one of the few places left that really talked about the history of Kenmore Square and how it evolved as an important part of the city in a place that was sort of a little bit on the edge of the city at one point. So there'd be a case to be made there. At least there would have been an opportunity for a discussion. And I think that's an important part of this change is, when people say, what have we lost because of this? A lot of these aren't even considered because, you have a preliminary conversation and you say, oh, it wouldn't make the standard because it's not local or regional. So you don't even have a robust conversation that may or may not lead to landmarking. And sometimes just that conversation is important enough to have to get a developer or property owner of the city to look at something differently. We don't even have those conversations on so many properties.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk about the building behind you again? How long has that owner owned that building there? And what was its last use and when was that?
I don't have all the details in front of me. Its last use, I believe, was as part storage for some automobile making parts.
Yeah.
It's been vacant for a number of years. The current owner, I believe, has held it for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. I don't have the exact number. And I've heard from a number of counselors and a number of developers who want to do something, and he's just sitting there. We've had a number of conversations with the city, and I'd love for us all to get on the same page and save this building before it's lost, because it's a great opportunity for affordable housing and historic preservation to work together.
Yeah, so he's not a long-term owner. It's not like he's owned the building for 30 years or whatever.
Not 30. There was another development that went bankrupt about 10, 15. I'd be happy to talk to you further, Counselor, about it.
Yeah, okay. We should, maybe if you can send me some information on that building in particular. And one thing something that I would have to raise, that if someone buys someplace and then it would be landmark, I think there should be some sort of funds there available for that person that kind of happens upon that. They buy it, or maybe they're in the process of buying it and it becomes landmarked. I mean, I think there should be, if we're asking people to, bring something back to its original character, that may be a difference of, $1 million or a couple $1 million. Is there any money attached to any of this for people that may buy these properties or look to make these properties better. That's just a thought maybe for the group and moving forward. I know there isn't any money available, but it should be something that is attached to it. So those are my comments.
Councilor Baker, I did want to make the point that when something is landmarked, there's free design services provided by the Landmarks Commission, and that's not, that's not minor.
No, I know, but Roseanne, if it's free design services to take a single family and turn it into a really nice single family instead of a single family that may go to 3 or 4 units, which the person that's developing that land may need those units. So it might be a little more than just the design services.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy. Thank you for the lead sponsors.
Counselor, I don't know, Counselor Flaherty still on?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Flaherty.
Just a quick question about the existing process and probably to Roseanne. I think Roseanne may have started to touch on it, but I was just curious to see whether or not you felt that, this would lead to additional applications for land marketing. And if so, would it be like a tsunami? Would you have the resources to be able to handle the flow of all those additional new requests for, to enter into the existing process?
Hi, Councilor Flaherty. What we have right now is a situation where people submit petitions for historic properties, and we need to spend staff time researching and going through, and then finally, after a month or a month and a half, come up with the sad conclusion that it's not above local significance. And sometimes people say, can you please look again? And it turns into it's still a time drain on staff to go through this. So it's kind of we're still looking at a lot of these locally significant resources, and they're just not getting to the next level where the commission gets a chance to see them and vote whether or not to accept the petition. So the rest of it I'll leave to others like Greg to respond to, but yeah, so we're spending a lot of time for naught.
It's interesting. So I guess, is there an existing registry, if you will, of sort of commission approved landmarks, or in the event that, it seems as though it seems like the triggering event for, and this could just be my vantage point, and you, Roseanne, you have a front row seat for it, but it seems like the triggering event for the inquiry is it'll be a proposed redevelopment, or it'll be a sale of a particular property. And then all of a sudden everyone gets all up in arms and they all are curious as to what's going to happen and what is the new owner going to do, and are they going to preserve this? Are they going to preserve that? Are they going to tear it down, etc.? That seems to be sort of the impetus for the inquiry. And I guess the question is, do we have the ability to sort of have, I guess, our own sort of Boston registry, if you will? So it's sort of already sort of an existing situation where whoever's buying it and or folks in the neighborhood understand sort of the parameters around, whether it surpasses locally significant and or it's already been sort of approved. It's already been through the process, the vetting process, that it is a landmark situation. It seems though, and then you go from development to development issue across the city as an at-large counselor, and it seems as though that event, the notice of the sale and or the proposal that gets submitted is the triggering event. And I was just curious to see whether or not we have the ability to kind of be way ahead of that process.
Well, it's, I'm sorry, Counselor.
I wanted to, Greg had wanted, I think, to follow up on the previous question, and then might have some insight on some of these other things. And then I'll go back to you, Roseanne, if that's okay.
Thank you, Counselor. It's actually interesting because the two questions are surprisingly related. And Councilor Flaherty, you raised a very good point, and something we've been raising for a while is in Boston, we've been managing this very poorly, in part, again, because the Landmarks Commission is understaffed and underfunded, that we should be more proactive. Instead, we're playing whack-a-mole, and that's really not how landmarking should work. We shouldn't be waiting until someone proposes something for property for some people to suddenly say, oh my gosh, that's important. We should be protecting it. We should be ahead of the curve. We need to be updating our surveys across the city. Many of the surveys of historic resources are old and don't address the very issue we're talking about, which is what Councillor Bach mentioned early on, is that what we look at as significant in history today, whose stories it represents, who it says, are not reflected in the inventories of historic resources from 20, 30, 40 years ago. They just don't look at places the same way and whose stories. So that's number one. We should be getting more ahead of it. So it's not the situation that you explain, and is unfortunately the way it's working a lot, that people fortunately are desperate and have to wait because they don't know. And that's not fair, not only to neighborhoods and residents, and it's not fair to property owners or developers, because they look at a historic property. We hear all this time. It's like they buy a building, it's not listed anywhere. Why should they think it's significant? Next thing they know, the neighborhood is jumping up and down, and they've already committed to a property and maybe spent money on it, assuming they were going to be able to demolish it, which gets to Councillor Baker's question about compensation for the property. That's not how the situation should be. I mean, legally, this is not considered a taking. That's been upheld in the court for years, but we want to be more transparent with people. And that means we should be understanding our historic resources, which are landmarkable, which are not, which neighborhoods care about, as well as which have issues related to climate change and resiliency in historic properties. We should be doing all that at once. And that's something that the city should be looking in a robust way to deal with the challenge you raise.
Roseanne?
I appreciate that, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I obviously second a lot of.
Uh-oh.
We lost.
We may have lost her for a little bit.
And then just through the chair, and this is my last point, and it goes to obviously what Roseanne is probably answering, and Greg had mentioned, is that from a credibility. So we got her.
Here we go. Yep, go ahead, Roseanne.
Sorry. So yeah, so we don't blindside anyone, and everything is, very clear. If you buy a house, it's historic. If we have a map, all that. So
which is great.
Everything is good. The conversation's great. Thanks.
So I think obviously the question is how we can work together to make sure that the landmarks is sufficiently funded to allow you folks to do the job that's necessary to identify the appropriate sites and parcels and buildings, et cetera. And then also, and then to Greg's point too, obviously the credibility standpoint is that, the building behind you has been there for years and years and years. And all of a sudden it's now thrust into this situation because of, again, potential sale or what have you. And obviously that version repeats itself across the city. And from a credibility standpoint, very much like when folks feel like the cake is baked with certain development projects, same can be said for folks that are advocating for a building to be landmarked so that they don't get accused of just coming out of the woodwork to stall something or to prevent something, or because they don't like the new owner, or et cetera. I think making sure that you guys have the resources to, again, be on the front end of this, as opposed to sort of playing catch up and being brought in and then having people sort of question the timing of it, et cetera. I think that would go a long way, on the transparency front. But again, when, we as councilors were out there across the city, and there are a lot of folks that, that don't have a lot of faith and confidence, in the development process and or in situations like this. And, by having the lines of communication and the transparency is critical, I think, so that people, so that they believe in the process and they believe in the system, and that they don't think that, the fix is in, if you will. So having you guys on the front end of all of that, identifying, the appropriate sites across the city that, obviously have surpassed that local significance, I think is huge on the whole process. So any way we can be helpful with respect to making sure that you have the appropriate resources, I think that we should be having that conversation as well. So I appreciate, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the lead sponsors' attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to note the good thing that we have in Councilor Bach is not only is she a leader in this conversation, she's also the chair of Ways and Means. And so she will be talking, I'm sure she'll come back to all of us as colleagues about all these wonderful excitement that we have for increasing budget items. So I just wanted to just note her leadership also when it comes to that conversation. We look forward to hearing from you, Greg, and all the other folks, especially during budget season. I think what I'd love to hear more about is examples of how historic preservation and development work together. You know, this is the conversation that I think I would love to be able to take back to my district. You know, that when people come and to set realistic expectations. You know, if you're coming here as just a whack-a-mole trying to stop any form of development, so okay, it's too big, okay, fine, then it's historically preserved, okay, fine, then it's in it's by the marsh, okay, fine, it's, but you know, then that's not what I'm trying to encourage, to give another tool to just come up with something to stop something you don't like. That being said, when there has been the beautiful building, such as the one behind you, and a developer does buy it, are there examples of the marrying of the two? So that's one question I'll put up. The other thing I wanted to note is to answer Councilor Baker's question that he asked about pipelines and projects. I know the Nazaro Center in the North End, which is formerly a bathhouse for immigrants, now is a community center. One of the biggest concerns was as we're creating a larger modern community center someplace else in the North End, what do we do with those buildings, right? So the big push is not to have it become just luxury condos, right? And so again, when we go to sit down and have this conversation, we had a bunch of amazing kids from architectural school, Boston Architecture Society students come in and design it, community-led design. But how do we marry that? How do we have that conversation? And it speaks to the organizing, which is my third point that we need to do. When it comes to historic preservation, we definitely are trying to preserve a lot of people and stop displacement, but the destruction of our buildings deserves a grassroots movement as well that is diverse, it's multilingual, and that is it's as well funded. So I would look to those organizations that are here today, wondering what your connection is with the youth, how multilingual you're organizing, or do you organize, and how to make sure that you marry that so that we are not simply coming in after the fact, coming in mostly in English, coming in mostly with people with a lot of wonderful letters behind their names because they have all this wonderful education, coming in lacking the diversity of the neighborhood that they're coming into, right? It should be a grassroots movement for preserving what's beautiful about our neighborhoods. And then finally, in terms of funding, I would love to hear how CPA money, since historic preservation is part of one of the line items that it's allowed to be used for. Again, another example of Councilor Bach's leadership. Before she was on the city council, she was part of that campaign as well. But how would this help? I'd assume getting some landmarks designation for some buildings or some projects or some areas. Would that help with CPA money and applications? So I'd say it's 4 buckets. One is what's good examples of historic preservation and development. Just a noted to Councilor Baker, the Nazaro Center, and then the other 2, CPA money being used for designated properties, and then also community organizing for historic preservation, to get out there and find these landmarks before they're up for sale, to get out there and be excited about their neighborhoods. I know, again, Councilor Bach, you did it on the environmental component with the Conservation Corps. I don't know if Conservation Corps could include a set of folks who are out there for historical purposes as well. So those are my my thoughts. To, I think, Greg, you physically moved. I assumed you had some thoughts on it, and then I'll go to Roseanne, Lynn, and Carl, if you wanted to respond.
Great. Thank you, Councilor. Good question. I just quickly jotted down a quick list of some projects that demonstrate the wonderful marriage of historic preservation and new development and often affordable housing. I'd encourage you to look at the Preservation Alliance website and many of the projects we've awarded over the years. But just to list a few, there's the substation in Roslindale. That's an affordable housing project right in Roslindale Square with Historic Boston Inc., which has done a number. The Ditson Mills in Jamaica Plain, Mission Hill, right down the street from this one. that was done by Wind Development, that's done a lot of affordable housing, and are national experts on affordable housing in historic resources that are based right here in Boston. The Goddard House is housing in a former historic building, a nursing home, St. Gabriel's in Brighton. There's a lot of projects downtown in North Station, many buildings you probably know I won't list. Fort Point is a local historic district. There's been a lot of development there. You know, some of those could have been done affordable as well as commercial. The Baker Chocolate Factory, the lofts down there are a combination of affordable and market rate in affordable. The other thing to note is these are wonderful opportunities because there are historic tax credits both on the state and the federal level for historic resources and affordable housing tax credits. So a project like this, Councilor Baker, if you're still on, could get 40% in affordable housing and another percent back in LIHTC affordable housing in addition to the historic. So that's just some examples. There are many, many more. These work really well together. And I will say the director of Madison Park Development Corporation is a member of our board, demonstrating the fact that, and many people working on modern projects are on our board. So historic preservation is not anti-development. As far as CPA, I think that's a good, I mean, there are two buckets in CPA that can work on a lot of these projects. Again, affordable housing and historic preservation. And I think it would be wonderful if the CPA committee could get some signals that they should be prioritizing those sorts of projects. This would be a wonderful CPA project that could draw from two buckets, and there's endless numbers of them. As far as the community organizing piece, you're right. This is a discussion we've been having internally about trying to get people in the community to work with us to identify places that are important to them. Those questions have not been asked enough. We have started a class called the Advocate Certificate Training Program, where we try to teach people in the communities about the historic preservation regulations so they can better advocate for themselves and work more collaboratively with us and the Landmarks Commission. We all work better when we hear from the community what's of concern to them and how we can do a better job protecting that collaboratively, collectively, that we're not coming in from the outside and telling them what's important, but we work together to understand what's important to them, and then it's a much better process for all. So hopefully that answered your questions.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn over. Councilor Braden is to ask any questions.
Thank you for your indulgence of my departure and coming back in again. One question, and this may have been addressed, and I realize that in terms of the workload for our friends at the Landmarks Commission, that they really could do with some more staff. And I don't know if there is a process of putting that on the agenda for our budget this year, and making sure that while we might be, if we pass this this home rule petition, we may be generating more cases for them to review. And I think it would be unfair to increase the workload without increasing the staff to help deal with it. So I wonder if that may have been discussed in my absence, and if it has, I apologize. I'm very excited about the idea of community organizing around having our communities identify buildings and locations in the neighborhood that have meaning and significance for them from a historical perspective, whether it's from particular ethnic communities or whatever. So I think that's something that certainly from our office we're looking at to see if we can close the gap between what folks on the ground and the community think about preservation. So those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor, if I may comment on that just very briefly. So in terms of budget, as you all know, this is budget season, and I will be, we will be discussing with our colleagues in the budget department the needs for FY22 of the Environment Department, including the landmark staff. So I will certainly take this information back to my conversations, with the budget department. I did want to make one comment about community organizing. The landmark staff, the historic preservation staff, already does do an enormous amount of outreach to the community. The bulk of that is around specific applications they have to get and that we get. And, we're sending out a lot of postcards. and emails to, abutters to make sure the community knows what's in place. We're also, we also are expanding our use of translation so that, some hearings are starting to occur in multiple languages when we know that there's going to be a need for that. Obviously, we can't translate every hearing into every language. But when we get the word that it's important, we can make that happen working with our colleagues in the Office of Language Access. And we do have an excellent quarterly newsletter that the environment staff, Landmark staff puts out about the work that they are doing. And we are, obviously there's more and more to do, and we can't do enough of it, but to spread the word that we do have these resources available, plus a lot of resources on our website. If you can help us get out the word about that, that would be great.
I'd be delighted to get the word out about that. Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bach, very briefly, then we have two people on, we have folks raising their hands for public testimony.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, I wanted to strongly second your point about the fact that historic preservation and development do not and should not need to be at odds. I live a stone's throw away from several historic buildings, both schools actually, that were transformed into affordable housing and have housed large communities of people now on the backside of Beacon Hill for 60 years. And it's a win-win for the neighborhood, both the ability to anchor those communities and to have these beautiful old buildings. And I think that, and I know it's really important for cities to be able to change and grow. But I think it's also, I think when people talk about the things they love that are new in a city, so often they actually are a case of repurposing, right? It's that kind of, it's not just change like we raise everything to the ground and put new things there. It's the fact that we actually get to kind of evolve the uses of things and overlap things with each other and have things adjacent to each other. Like that is part of the wonderful diversity of the city's built environment. And if you thin out all of the historical resources, then you don't end up with that augmented diversity over time. So you really have to, and the problem of course is like, people are usually pretty good about saving the building that's 300 years old, but they're bad about saving it when it's 100 years old, right? And so there's this moment where we lose a lot of things. And I think that that finding those ways to repurpose and to be creative and to figure out how to, add where it's appropriate height and all that, like that's a piece of this. But I think that once you knock something down, we never get it back. And I think all the time about the deeply beloved community that Councillor Edwards represents over in the North End and the backside of Beacon Hill, and the fact that between the two of them, we've got an area where we just knocked everything down. And I just think we really have to be careful about this. But Councillor Edwards is giving me that look because I've gone on too long. Let me say one more thing, which is that yes, we will talk about this in budget season. We have to be more proactive. It is also a part of equity. It's the same way that if you only fix the streetlights in response to 311s, you serve the people who are best on the app. If you only do landmarking in response to 10 citizen petitions that people mainly who speak English, et cetera, are like more prepared to do, you won't landmark immigrant history. So you have to be proactive. We have to be looking at a citywide survey. We have to be staffing our existing landmarks backlog. All of that, people will hear more from me in the future. In terms of this fix is about giving the city of Boston the ability to preserve the city of Boston's history. Mm-hmm. It's simple. It's literally a couple of words, and it's a power and a standard that other cities all over the country have, as you heard, and it would be a tool in our hands that we could put to good use. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We're going to go back to public testimony now. I have Christopher Hart. And then John Brookston. Christopher Hart.
Hi, Chris Hart, Boston, Landmarks. I've been on the Landmarks Commission for almost 10 years now. And the reality is our backlog continues to grow. That said, we have the same folks generally that come in with landmark participants. Those are folks who are predominantly well educated and well connected. What has been missing for years, and it was something that was recommended to Mayor Walsh in the transition, that whenever a property changes hands or is going through BPDA or DND review, is it a large billboard be put up at that property saying that this property is undergoing review for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so that everyone who drives by, walks by that property, actually knows what's going on. That's a basic thing that somehow even New York figured out how to do decades ago, and they figured out how to do it in a multilingual manner. So I see this change as a beginning effort to right this ship. The second piece of that is to actually fix the internal process so that DND and IST and the BOA don't start talking about a particular project before it comes to us. Too often we are a tail wagging the dog, and that's gotta get fixed. This does not fix that. That's the next step, along with changing the 90-day demolition delay to a year or 2 years, because it's got actually a bite to it. Beyond that, I think we gotta be honest with each other. Every year that goes by, that is another year's worth of buildings that become potentially eligible for landmarking. If we look at the stat size as it exists today, it really has not grown significantly since Roseanne's predecessor.
Chris may have actually put himself on mute accidentally. We're just gonna wait for a couple moments for him to get adjusted and then to finish. No problem.
No, it's not in levels are not really progressed.
Chris, for some reason, we heard you better before. I don't know if your earphones took away your, but at least I heard him better before. And now you're back on mute.
Is that there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good. I put them on backwards. I think you hear me loud and clear. This is a multi-step process to getting this ship right. Finally, I think, thinking about a couple of your country's questions, makes me think, right now, a place like Doughboy Donuts on Dorchester would not qualify, and yet it is integral to Boston's building and trades history as a place that folks got their breakfast at 4 in the morning before they went to work, doing steel, iron, or the big day. And so I think we need to really embrace some of these locations which frankly may not have the New York Times architectural digest appeal, but are truly the fabric of Boston. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. A good reference to Doughboy Donuts and talking about neighborhood significance. So thank you for that. John Brookston?
Yes, thank you for taking my comments, and thank you for setting up this hearing in the first place. I have three fairly quick comments. One is Mass Ave is a likely target for some taller, intrusive buildings. And one location that really could use a lot of restoration is the corner of Mass Ave and Tremont Street, a beautiful, once beautiful building, which is in such disrepair right now that I don't know if it's redeemable. But if it is, I certainly would hope that somebody takes a look at it and makes it into affordable housing, as was talked about before. Second is that Fenway, where I live on Mass Ave in Fenway, is a largely historic neighborhood. And I certainly would not want to see, as sometimes gets proposed on streets like Burbank and others, a building with glass or something else that ruins the historic nature or is too tall and so on. Third, looking the other direction, this used to be a historic neighborhood because of the Christian Science Church and the beautiful grounds around it and the publishing building and so on, which were our historical landmarks. However, when they sold, or I guess leased for 100 years, the property on Dalton Street to 30 Dalton and 1 Dalton, that completely changes the perspective of what one sees from Fenway when one looks to the east. And I think both of those were mistakes, if you will, done for monetary purposes for the city, but not considering the neighborhood. And there's no affordable housing, of course, in 1 Dalton. They moved that all into the intersection of South End and Roxbury. And, oh, maybe, no, I'm sorry, that was a different one. That was the Petersboro buildings that are going up. And we have to be very careful with those at Kilmarnock and Petersboro to make sure that they don't ruin that section of the Fenway. But affordable housing and renovation of historic buildings would be a terrific way to go. And lastly, although I am not an expert on architecture or historical buildings or construction and costs and so on, we in District 8 elected an unbelievably wonderful and knowledgeable city councilor. Thank you very much, Kenzie. And I trust you to give you my proxy to argue for all the things which you know so much about and are so articulate about. Thank you all.
Thank you. So I'm going to just again announce those folks who are on public testimony who may want to testify. If you want to raise your hands right now, that way I know to call on you. Other than that, we're going to conclude. If I don't get any hands raised, I'm going to conclude today's, I think, very efficient and very good hearing on this home rule petition, because I want more than anything to be able to move this along. I didn't hear too many suggestions for any language changes, as it's very slight what we're doing, more like a grammatical change in making sure the city of Boston has a seat at the table. So I don't know, normally I do a hearing, then a working session where we go into the language, deeper into the language, and then go into then we conclude, or excuse me, then we go to a vote. But again, this is like a common and kind of situation. It's really slight, I think, in the change in language. So I don't know that we will need a full-on working session. I'll check with the sponsors though to make sure of that. To the public, if you have any language suggestions, right, so that warrant us going deeper into the conversation, I'd really appreciate that you go ahead and make those suggestions. Christopher, I see you've raised your hand again. I normally reserve this for people who haven't spoken yet. And so other than, unless you have a language suggestion, I'm going to probably conclude this as everyone's spoken at least once who wanted to speak. Okay. All right, then. So to my colleagues, thank you so much. And to the public, thank you so much for participating. Christopher, if you have anything you would like to add, you can certainly send an email. It will go to the chair and to the co-sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Paul. Thank you, Lynn and Carl and Roseanne. And Greg. Sorry, Greg. I did the admin.